So how will all this play out for the U.S. on the global stage? Let's discuss with our guests. Pinar Cebi is a former chief economist at the U.S. International Trade Commission, and Pinar Cebi Wilber is the chief economist for the American Council for Capital Formation. Pinar Wilber, the EU Trade Commissioner, wasn't mincing her words when she called the U.S. tariffs a dangerous game. Trump believes the trade wars are easy. They're easy to win. But he is up against some serious economic heavyweights like China, isn't he? How exactly does this end?
So if you're looking at U.S. trade policy, if we keep the tariffs at unilateral level, which means U.S. acts and other countries behaves as usual, and they don't act and they don't respond, probably that's not going to create a much harm for United States. I don't think so.
But they said they would.
Okay, so that's the point. If everyone starts acting up and if everyone starts throwing in tariffs, then the equation will change.
And we're not just talking about throwing in tariffs, we're talking about surgical retaliation. Many have hinted, have even announced that the trade tariffs that they'll put in place will hit some of these Republican states. That will really hurt Trump's base.
Well, yeah, it would. What we're really talking about here is economic sanctions to change behavior. And the lessons of history are that if you're going to apply an economic sanction, which is what the United States is doing to China, then it has to be fairly complete. You have to have your allies involved with you. For example, sanctions were effective with Iran and South Africa, but not in other circumstances.
But hold on, these are not sanctions. These are tariffs that you're employing against your trade
partners. I'll put
partners.
the words that I want on it.
No, but these are not sanctions, to be clear.
No, they're not sanctions in your mind, but they are working the way sanctions do. You're cutting off trade. They're talking about changing investment rules for Chinese firms and things like this. They are actions designed to cause economic discomfort.
But discomfort to whom in the long term?
You seem to want to answer the question for me.
I'm asking you the question.
But I'm
Discomfort
saying
to whom?
the objective of the administration is to cause economic discomfort for China so that it'll change its behavior. And what I'm saying is that we know from the history of economic sanctions, which is the closest analog we have. I mean, you say, a trade war this, a trade war that. What history do we have of trade wars? We don't have a history of trade wars.
Well, there is a history of trade wars. I mean, Trump is not the first American president to spark a trade war with his European and other allies, is he? I mean, Herbert Hoover did it back in the 1930s. Nixon did it. Reagan did it. Why is Trump doing it?
You really have a very peculiar view of history.
No, but this is the fact, isn't it?
No, it's not a fact.
It's not a fact.
But the point is that what we know about this is that unless you have your allies in line so that you can bring a lot of pressure and the country that your target can't find a way around it, it is very difficult to prevail.
But are they bringing their allies on the table to fight? That's the problem. Especially in a world economy that's so integrated, it's hard to separate the lines. And I think what the Trump administration was doing wrong is opening too many fires on different fronts. Yeah. And I don't think that that's going to help their case. Let's look at China. China is a global problem, which needs a global solution. By offending your allies, Canadians, Mexicans, European Unions, before going into that war is not going to help you.
But when Trump says this is not a level playing field, something needs to be done, does he have a point, though? Is the tactic that he is employing the wrong one?
The problem is right. We have a problem with China. I mean, no one is denying that. I think the tactics are wrong. I will not proceed with the tariffs. Probably, the U.S. led the organization of WTO, the dispute settlement. I think they could have worked with that process and improve it if that was our heartburn. But the way that they're attacking the problem is not a solution.
Why not work with the allies, Pinar Cebi?
Well, I think he would like to work with the allies, but he's gone ahead and started another fight with them about aluminum and steel. That makes it very difficult to do. That's the first thing. But even if you took aluminum and steel away, there's a couple of overlays here. One is that several of the ally leaders are confusing their responsibilities as heads of government with their personal views of Donald Trump as a person. And I think that is a mistake. For example, it's very difficult to cooperate with Britain right now because Theresa May curls her lip every time she sees him. So that's the first problem. The second is the Europeans would say to us, well, if it's steel and excess capacity, let's have negotiations. We've been doing that for 20 years. If you want to talk about technology and so forth, let's go to the WTO. Well, we know that's failed. The methods that they would prescribe to accomplish change are not there. That's one thing. Those two things. And there's a third thing. within the European Union, many of the things that China does to all its trading partners globally, Germany does to its southern neighbors by insisting on running a trade surplus and running the kind of trade regime that it does. So how do you get Angela Merkel, who doesn't personalize the relationship very much, on board when you're asking her to be at odds with China in a way that contradicts her?
But is he making a major miscalculation by pushing these European countries around? The EU as a bloc is the largest trading partner with the United States, and they are now pursuing their own trade deals with Asia, with Japan, with China. So they do have quite a bit of leverage these days, don't they? I mean, are they likely to back down?
I think at the beginning there was a chance of negotiation because I think there was a division between Germany and France. I think Germans were more willing to come to table to strike a deal, but French were a little hesitant. But after the latest G7 meeting, and when the personal insults started flying, I think that kind of went down. The reason I am worried is this way of negotiating is also strengthening the hand of the other leaders because they have a political base to respond at home. Who wants a weak leader? I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau has to respond to his political base. And then, probably your trade negotiators are doing a great job behind the closed doors, but then your president or his senior advisor comes out and insults.
He is berating these leaders in personal terms, like the Prime Minister of Canada calling him weak and dishonest. Is this a wise negotiating tactic? Is it a tactic to force the hand of Canadians and Mexicans with the negotiations going on with NAFTA? Or is it something else, a policy shift?
It's not a policy shift. I wrote a piece the day after the G7 breakup in which I said was Trump brought the correct message to the G7 about what the Americans want to accomplish, but all the children need to behave better. Trump has been baited by some of these leaders. Unfortunately, he's risen to the bait, but I think it is an unfair characterization to place the blame for bad behavior entirely on Trump's shoulders. Theresa May, for example, behaves as if she can treat him badly because of his history. I don't find his history very acceptable, but the reality is he's President of the United States, just as I'm a guest here, and we should be treated appropriately.
But some would say the same about the Prime Minister of Canada and others as well.
Hold on. Trump left the room willing to sign that statement. He gets on an airplane, and then Trudeau starts prancing like a peacock to the Canadian electorate, saying, I won't take any nonsense from him. That baited Trump. That was a time to keep his mouth shut. They had the guy willing to sign something. They should have left it alone.
Should they have left it alone? I mean, Canada was called a national security threat. Shouldn't they have reacted slightly, a little bit?
I think it's the dairy that's the national security. I don't know, the information that's coming out, I haven't heard Prime Minister Trudeau behaving like a peacock. In fact, some of the journalists who were in the room said that he was actually trying to be very level-headed when he was trying to explain how he wanted to work with U.S.
It's reached the level where the chemistry is so poor that it's going to take some time for things to decompress. The real problem here is that some of them have histories which make it difficult for that to happen. Trump, Merkel, and May in particular.
But now you take on China as well, and doesn't the United States, when you look at the wider picture, the negotiating, the deal-making, the peacemaking in the Korean Peninsula, doesn't China play an important role, and doesn't Trump need China for his North Korea negotiations?
I have argued that we don't need China at all for the North Korean negotiations. It really comes down to a very simple situation there. Either we have a military option and we're prepared to use it, therefore North Korea has to deal, and in turn North Korea really wants to embrace the West, and given their economic circumstances they'd be smart to do it because China hasn't made their life very easy, or not. I don't think that we can count on the Chinese to be honest, forthright, deliver on promises and so forth. So my feeling is that China is not that much a factor. unless it wants to intervene in some way. And I don't think it really wants to do that.
Pinar, to you finally. China is not that much of a factor. Do you agree? Because this trade war seems like it is also pushing old enemies closer together. We saw the Chinese and the Indians come together. Their GDP in a couple of decades will apparently surpass that of the G7 countries. Iran seems to be turning to Russia and China as well for trade and security. Mexico turning to Latin America. So, I mean, there are alternatives, aren't there?
There are alternatives, and don't forget, China has a population of 1.3 billion. That's a huge market. When, as an economist, you think long term, and having China part of the negotiation is an important factor. It's a big market, so yes, I think China will be a big player, and given their policies, you're expecting them to be a big player in certain countries, in certain locations, certain regions. Maybe today they might not be a big factor when you put them vis-a-vis to United States, but they are growing and they are moving to a certain target.
And who stands to lose more, the US or China in this trade war, with China having this trade surplus?
Yeah, but don't forget, when you look at the trade surplus with United States, not all the value that's coming from China is a Chinese production. Yes. There are actually allies who are sending their products in there. When you're tracking an iPhone, maybe out of that, I don't know, 300 billion, 200 billion belongs to China. Yeah. So
it doesn't show the full picture.
No, it's not. It doesn't show the full picture.
No winners, or do we have winners in this trade war? Very briefly.
I don't believe that we're going to have a winner in this trade war. I think it will end. I think the Chinese will make some kind of concession that won't give Americans what they like. But in projecting forward, it's very easy to say, for example, that China and India will have a GDP larger than Europe, whatever. The Europeans are going to become a diminished player over the next quarter century because they cannot solve their internal problems. And the arrangement of alliances is going to look very different 20 years from now than today. If I dare forecast, the American alliance with other countries in the Pacific and with Britain is going to be very much more important than NATO is now.
Well, that's true. I think that was the reason of the change of heart of President Trump when he started talking about Trans-Pacific Partnership, because he saw that how important that was actually.
And he walked away from it. All right, well, on this note, let me thank you both, Pinar Wilber and Peter Morrissey. Thank you very much indeed. Still ahead, we visit a factory in Pennsylvania and hear from steel workers.
I think in general, our trade laws are pretty weak in this country.
And we ask a former Trump trade advisor about the politics driving the president's agenda.